Alright, this another video that's going to take a while to go through because I've grabbed a whole bunch of video clips to try and nail down this legal point of view. And for all of those listening that couldn't be bothered listening to lots of the other audios, they lay out a criminal case against the Parliament and many of the members inside that Parliament, going deeper than The Voice, down into actual war crimes that are occurring on Australian soil in a rather large conspiracy at law. And we're going to investigate that a little bit further today as we go through some video clips. Now, I have to probably warn you, this is going to take some time and it might be a few episodes, but we're going to go through what some of the people have been saying in the parliamentary space and on the media, and have a look at the legal ramifications of their actual words that have already been spoken and at some point can be considered to be a criminal offence outside of the parliamentary privilege of speaking like an absolute idiot. And we've seen the clown show that parliamentary privilege provides, because Pauline once wore a burqa in the Parliament to sort of prove this point. We will see Pauline speak a little bit later, and I have pulled out a number of politicians and legal professionals. We've already seen how Nicholas Aroney, proclaimed constitutional lawyer, has already lied about constitutional law live on TV. So it's quite evident that either these people are purely ignorant and dumb, or there is a modus operandi behind all of this, and they are all plotting together in a conspiracy, having conspired together in an academia. And this is the hardest part here. You're going to see academia be partly responsible, and this comes down to curriculum driven into that academia in the first. So we start to see that this conspiracy becomes rather larger than The Voice, and The Voice is just the trigger to open the door to so much more.
Fact check time. The Prime Minister yesterday announced the date for the vote for The Voice, November 14, and today took his Yes campaign to must-win Tasmania and started pumping out the half-truths.
This is something that has come from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people themselves.
No, the idea for The Voice came from a self-selected group of Aboriginal activists. Many Aborigines are against. Next.
What it does do is ensure that advice can be given.
No, well, you can all give governments advice. What this Voice will have the power to do is make representations under the Constitution, with courts probably saying governments can't act until they consider them. Then came this reason for Aborigines needing The Voice.
To overcome, as the Uluru Statement speaks about, the torment of powerlessness.
Aborigines aren't powerless. 11 people identifying as Aboriginal are in the federal parliament. They're not powerless. Aboriginal academics, sportsmen, they're not powerless.
This is a gracious request by Indigenous Australians.
No, it's not a gracious request. It's a stick-up. It's a demand for more political rights. And one of the key architects for that voice they're demanding, Noel Pearson, says it will be used to demand even more.
Our aspirations nationally in terms of is to have a voice to the Parliament, and once we have a representative body, we will seek to negotiate a treaty with the Australian Parliament.
Joining me is Nationals frontbencher Barnaby Joyce, the former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby, good to see you. How do you see the contest over the voice going over the next 6 weeks. How could the yes side win? Down in the polls, how could it win?
Well, I acknowledge that now that the car has run down off the hill and we've got to keep the momentum going on the flat. And what I would say about the Prime Minister, that half lies are worse than full lies, because you're feigning towards half the truth, and you're using a guile and cunning to tell people half the story. And as you say, there's nothing in this referendum question that talks about advice. It talks about the capacity for referral, and the High Court will determine the power of that. And whether you like it or, no matter how you cut it or dice it, it's a racial clause. And in 2023, we're going to be determining rights premised on the colour of your skin. Now, I thought that would be anathema to Australians. We're an egalitarian people. We believe that we deal with you in the circumstances we find you in, not on the colour of your skin. But that's exactly what this will determine. It will determine that certain people, by reason of the colour of their skin and certain DNA, have rights that another person does not have. I cannot work out how Australia could vote for that.
So we have a fact check, some receipts, and some accusations and claims. Let's go through them step by step. Right, so self-selected group of activists. And this is absolutely true, because all you had to have a look at is Craig Kelly and the red flag, red ensign episode. They semi-know what they're doing in their activism to try and undermine not only the Constitution, but destabilise Parliament itself, which means national security. And what we're going to see is this activist group kind of be shown out and get angry for being shown out. This will happen in a later video that I've selected. But here you have an absolute lie coming from Labor and the Prime Minister's office, Prime Minister and Cabinet. So what was said next? Advice to be given to the Parliament. So he's talking about undermining the executive branch of your Constitution, which links you to your monarch. And we're not talking about Charles III. We're talking about your Anzac and the line of authority established in the Commonwealth of Australia when 62,000 men spilt their blood across battlefields so that Australians and tribes could live happily together on a soil side by side until 1967 and everything went to shit. So here you have a con man, Noel Pearson, saying that once they undermine the Parliament, then they'll treaty with the Parliament that they've undermined. And this is the statement that I made in a previous video, in that how can you treaty with a foreign entity if you are inside that entity undermining it? And what happens when that entity realises what you've done? Now we get Barnaby talking on a slightly legal level, in that this is a contract, the Constitution, it's a legal document, and there has to be full disclosure to all that are party to a document. And there is no full disclosure going on when a referendum has now been announced, and the trying to undermine that referendum has occurred since the Senate allowed it to even pass the Senate. And that's the bizarrest part here, is that the Senate itself allowed something that is considered to be a criminal offence to slip through their very fingers. Now, Barnaby then turns around and speaks about racism. And this is a very real thing, because he knows the standing and position that he has as administrative government under the United Nations. And apartheid, or trying to drive something you administer apart and set race upon race, is actually against international law. And this now becomes an international war crime. And I think Barnaby is slightly aware of this, having a lot more experience in the international space over the last 30 years, having dealt with several international conflicts. What we have here, though, is the first of many politicians admitting this is about race and about divisive tactics and manipulation and negligence to provide full disclosure to what would be considered a legal formulation of change to a legal document. So this very, very important stuff to not only Australians, but those around the world that interact with this constitution by way of trading with the Commonwealth of Australia.
We need to have a discussion about land back. One simple way to initiate land back is a moratorium on the sale of Crown land across this country. Once privatised, that land is locked away and is not coming back easily.
Lydia's kind of right here, but she's going to play totally on your ignorance as to what the Constitution is, whose land it is, how this usufruct agreement all came about, and how all these mines, forests, fisheries and agricultures got taken over by monetary interests, i.e. corporations. So she's kind of right here, but it doesn't apply to Aborigine. It applies to the Australian Imperial Crown and its constitution, which is under the administration of foreign curial powers. So if Lydia wants what she wants, she can get the fuck out of our constitution and go back to her sovereignty, right? Her sovereignty is not found in the Australian Imperial Crown and its constitution currently administered by a St Edward's Crown and a foreign curial power in Charles III. Her sovereignty is found in all of these tribes all across the country. And we're going to hear that as we progress through this series of videos. But here we have Lydia. So let's listen on.
This land doesn't belong to the Crown. Come on. It never has. And it should be handed back to First Peoples, whose land it is.
Correction, Lydia. This land belongs to the Australian Imperial Crown, as forged by their Anzac and defined in stone of remembrance in the King's domain. It doesn't belong to the St Edward's Crown at which you took an oath to. Oh, come on. Doesn't belong to the Crown you took an oath to. And then later in this video, we're going to see you contradict that very oath. Aren't we, Lydia? Isn't that kind of a Section 44 problem for you when you consider that your parliamentary privilege kind of ends when you start saying that you're there to undermine the very thing you work for?
Treaty provides us with an opportunity to put everything on the table, to reset the framework and heal. Peace treaties must be front and centre with every one of our nations to self-determine for themselves. We are not one homogenous group, as much as the colonial project would like us to be. We know
So we already know that Lydia is one of these activists that can't really speak for all of these tribes. But she's very correct in what she says here, in that they're not one homogenous group. They are, in fact, individual tribes that were interspersed between all of your cities. They had a right to be those free people on the land. What you as a people don't understand is that a St Edward's Crown enslaved you for your debts, and as an Australian Imperial Crown, you were free on the land next to these tribes. And she's alluding to this, knowing that there is a line of authority that she's going to address later while she skirts on her activism, now knowing that the law is starting to sort of come to fruition. We have some recent videos, and then we start to look back at what she said in the past. And you're already starting to see she's been involved in this conspiracy. And as we move forward, she's either backing away from it, realizing that there are criminal offences being committed in this whole entire undermining, or she is still party to this as she steps away and starts to mock the very process that she herself initiated with the Greens back in 2018, 2019.
Treaties can be broken, and they have been. But we have an opportunity in this country right now to have treaties of the 21st century. And we can learn all of the lessons from our brothers and sisters around the world. Treaty is what we make it.
So she's talking about her activist groups all around the world, like BLM and those sorts of Soros agreement groups that are being used in a communist manner to undermine constitutions. And this led to January the 6th trials in America that saw a lot of these types of people go and serve rather lengthy jail sentences. That there are some of these people that are still serving sentences today. I believe Caveman Hornman was released and has since been talking on the media, but he still served his full sentence for his actions within the Capitol building. And this is the kind of stuff that we're looking at right here as we go through these videos.
It has to come from the people. And the best part, you don't need a referendum for a treaty, just a government who is willing. Senate seats can be legislated. Recommendations can be implemented. Change can happen.
So everything that she just mentioned there is a legal impossibility in a treaty. She's either a sovereign woman from her tribe interacting with the Commonwealth externally in a diplomatic manner, or she's directly trying to undermine the Constitution for some kind of communist benefit that she's getting caught out at. And Jacinta Price is demonstrative of this as a parliamentary woman who is respective of her Indigenous tribes. There are other people in the parliament that are not like Lydia, and the Di Natale giving of the seat away is very suspicious because of what was occurring before the seat was even given away.
This is our chance to mature as a nation, to have the hard conversations with each other and ourselves, to confront the racism we have all been socially conditioned to accept.
So we have Barnaby on one side of the fence saying the voice itself is racism, but now we have the call from the activist side of the fence that they are feeling racially oppressed. They're the ones that are racially oppressed and need some sort of voice to not be racially oppressed. And by creating that racial division, therefore then create an aura of apartheid and then start oppressing others, because that's just the way things go when you start to take these communist ideologies. So we now have a racial side of this coming from Lydia herself and also from Barnaby Joyce.
I mentioned this last night. There's been some pretty amazing legal minds put submissions into this voice inquiry. People like the former Royal Commissioner Terry Cole, former High Court Judge Ian Callanan, former Supreme Court Judge Nicholas Hasluck, all expressed reservations about the voice or opposed it. Now, one submission that really struck me, and I mentioned it briefly last night, came from two distinguished legal academics, Professors Nicholas Aroney and Peter Durangelo.
Right, so media is stuck on academia. They won't listen to the law itself. They need to listen to legal experts like Mr. Nicholas Aroney, who was caught on video basically demonstrating a very stark lack of knowledge in the Constitution, or a direct attack on the Constitution by lying that a citizen could make a treaty. And this was a very stark revelation that he would sit there relaxed in a chair with John Anderson and make that statement. So this academia that is being trusted upon is either ignorant or directly attacking the premise of this being truthful at all.
And in paragraph 8 of their submission, they note, while distinct from the Parliament, the Executive and the courts, the Indigenous voice would be accorded a similar constitutional status. In essence, this is not, as voice advocates would have you believe, some minor change to give Aboriginal Australians recognition as our first Australians, but rather creating a fourth arm of our government.
No. This is so much worse, and that's why we're back. That's totally why we're home. They want to remove the executive branch of government and give it to the Aborigine in the absence of the naked owner who presented themselves on the Supreme Court record. And ever since that Supreme Court record was defined in 2020 and 2021, they shut themselves, and they've been going through this modus operandi to try and undermine your lineage with God and your Anzac and your King's Domain and your constitution, not their constitution. They've been going down this path on purpose. So what we note here are several voices from the legal profession that are starting to speak up about the legal ramifications without speaking out about who they serve and what that means in respect to the Constitution itself, and what naked ownership is, and what they've done with native title, and what the right of royal prerogative is to those naked owners, given that criminal offences and war crimes have occurred by that administration. I'd like Nicholas Aroney to make a full comment on all of this, because I'd be willing to stand in the High Court and challenge everything these people have to defend themselves with.
It's rather terrifying, actually. If you think about what a fiduciary duty involves, it means the person who's covered by that fiduciary duty needs to put someone else's interests above their own. So the Commonwealth of Australia would need to put someone else's interests, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, their interests above their own interests. It would clearly restrict the sovereign power of the Commonwealth in a way that nobody has even considered.
What do you say? No one's ever considered? No. Steve, myself, been putting it on the court record for 15 years. Don't tell me no one's ever considered this problem. This is the exact problem that I brought up on the court record 15 years ago. This is an absolute lie coming from so-called constitutional experts that should know what is set down on the court record and is defined as a curial right. This is a difficult thing for these lawyers to now comprehend. He has talked about a line of authority in that constitution at some point leading to a sovereign, which is now defined on the Supreme Court of New South Wales court record. And this is a difficult thing to comprehend when this government is an administrator under the Hague Conventions, Article 55, rules under the rules of usufruct. Administration under the rules of usufruct. So as naked owners, we have the lawful right over our constitution and can see that they have tried to remove our lawful right and give it to a minority population that they manipulated into our constitution in 1967. They started this problem and are now being caught out at the very problem they created. And you can see that it's not Aborigine Australia either. You are starting to see that it's activist Australia and communist Australia that's been attempting to undermine your very government for a very, very long time.
David Davis joins me now. Great to see you. Thank you for your time. Why are you against The Voice?
Pleasure. Well, there's two fundamental reasons, Andrew. The first is that it's wrong in principle. I think that dividing one Australian from the other on the basis of race is a mistake. So I think you put that principle argument forward, and others have a different view on that, and I'm very respectful of people's views. Further, I think the second reason...
So, statement of law, isn't it? He doesn't really give a shit about other people's points of views. He has a legal precedence to consider. So he's put that very clearly on the table, that this is a racial divide, which is a technical crime of apartheid, and he's not willing to say that openly, but he's kind of flexing off on the, well, I respect other people's points of views, but they're not really going to hold up in a courtroom, are they?
I'm against The Voice is because of the actual consequences of it. It will tamper with our constitution. I'm a state MP, and some have said that there's no impact on the states. Well, I have a very different view to that.
He knows from inside the state the manipulation has already started, and the view that he is seeing is the apartheid that the New Zealand government created in its health system, which is an international criminal violation against the United Nations and a whole bunch of treaties that are now being broken by the Albo government and his monetary powers.
I think what will happen very quickly, if a voice is enacted and put in the Constitution, bolted into the Constitution in a way that would be very hard to excise in the future, it will intrude into federal-state relations heavily. It will immediately start looking at federal-state agreements on health, on education, on transport. They will have views on a whole range of topics. They'll be down.
So we already see New Zealand doing this to health queues, but he talks about Rosa Parks on a bus. Get to the back of the bus. You're a white person. You're not allowed on the bus. The black people get to sit at the front of the bus. That's the kind of stupid that we're talking about here. That I had a dream. Martin Luther King tried to stop all this bullshit back in the 60s. And then we're getting played, totally played by communists to get to this point. And Mr. Lawyer Man here knows it. And he sees the threat in the line of authority, lacking executive government in a crown and king, which is established on the Supreme Court record, which is the cause of all of this problem that you're seeing as a government scrambles not to recognise what Justice Lonergan defined as a war crime on the actual court record. And this is going to catch up. It's slowly coming to a head, and that's what you're starting to see as Albo scrambles with the date. Like he pushed forward a date to be able to try and sway the people, not realising the legal ramifications he put in play already will undo everything that he has started all the way back to 2017, 2016 and earlier. Because we talk about enterprise bargain agreements and real world slavery in this country that we're only touching on here. while they try and manipulate populations into an industrial revolution and genetic modification system.
And at the Grants Commission, actually looking at the financial formulas between the states. And, you know, in my view, Victoria will always be the loser when they start ramping up transfers between the states and territories.
He hits on grants, but we'll leave it for now because Pauline's just going to blow that out of the water later from a video of hers from over 2 years ago.
The public debate over the voice getting personal. This full-page advertisement in the Australian Financial Review, authorised by no campaign group Advance Australia, depicts Wesfarmers chairman Michael Chaney with his daughter, Independent MP Kate Chaney, sitting on his lap. Mr Chaney is offering a stack of cash to Yes23 director Thomas Mayo, pointing to Wesfarmers' $2 million donation to the Yes campaign. In a statement, Ms Chaney slammed the depiction, saying that
it's disappointing to see the No campaign stooping to personal and racist attacks.
It's a straightforward cartoon which is spelling out exactly what it is, which is about corporate Australia spending shareholders' money on this campaign.
But
so another academic constitutional lawyer that is slightly left-leaning instead of non-bias. It's racism. This cartoon's racism, but it hits the nail on the head that Wesfarmers needs good little wards of state to participate in the little scheme they've got going on, the Ponzi scheme of the wards of state, and the cartoon hits the nail on the head. And Mundine there, he totally agrees that it hits the nail on the head because it's taken the piss out of something that we're going to touch on in a little while in another video. So we're going to just pay attention to who this constitutional lawyer is, because we've already seen Nicholas Aroney lie blatantly on the media, and what we're going to see this lady do is sort of similar. So we'll get through that in one of the later videos.
The voice has changed. Not that you'd know it, actually. It's light on detail, isn't it? But Dennis Shanahan in The Australian reports today that the government has quietly changed its position on the Indigenous voice to Parliament and executive government. You see, the proposed wording for the referendum to be held this year is now different. Apparently, they've removed executive government. Now, this is simply incredible. They've been telling us for months that unless we support the voice, we're racists. But this move shows that even the government is now unable to support their original version of what they insisted we supported. That's the one they've been banging on to us about for months now.
Here's the hilarity for all of you, is that executive branch government comes from a prerogative right, which was defined on the Supreme Court record. And I bet you they're having a real hard time with the fact that they don't have that prerogative right. They only have an administrative right to all of their wards that boarded their vessel and played in this game. So it's kind of amusing that they would backtrack on an executive branch government, given that we're over here with the prerogative right defined on the Supreme Court of New South Wales court record, along with all the war crimes that were committed by the state of New South Wales. So as we move through this, you can see it's already a debacle. And then there's another claim of racism, but these claims go back and forward. So if they must apply from one side, then they can apply from the other side, so they must apply from the first side, so they must apply from the second side, and then therefore they must apply to the third side or any other side that joins in post fact. Therefore making this a direct criminal offence of apartheid, which is a crime against humanity, an actual technical international war crime at international law.
With the treaty process, we're seeing these treaties being developed. You know, we see Queensland, the Northern Territory, Victoria committing to treaty processes. But, I mean, just to go to your point about the king, can the states actually negotiate treaties with different Aboriginal clans, or is this something that needs to be negotiated with the Commonwealth or even with the Crown?
Well, a treaty...
Boom! He said it! He totally said it, didn't he? And the prerogative right in the Crown comes from which crown? Line of authority to which stone? Giving that royal prerogative to who? And this becomes a real question when that who is the one that's been pointing out all of the mistruths that have been spoken over the years to come to this culminating point of almost being able to walk in, or say we are ready to walk into a courtroom, but we think that the people need to sort of wake up to the fact that communism runs their country and has done for a very long time. And it's going to become very, very straightforward here, given that statement just about hit the nail on the head legally, didn't it? Just hit the nail on the head legally. Now wait for the answer from the lady.
...is between two sovereigns. So the Crown says that they are sovereign through enacting the Australian Parliament, and we are sovereign.
By an act in the Australian Parliament, you are wrong. By prerogative right over the Constitution as defined in Quicken Garron's annotated Constitution. You gave up your sovereignty the moment you became a citizen of some foreign power. You gave up that sovereignty very, very clearly by becoming a senator in the government of that power. You gave up your sovereignty so very, very clearly that you became a senator under an oath of allegiance, which you took on a world stage. So there is no way in hell you are sovereign to yourselves in any way, shape or form. And then second to that, you're not a sovereign. You're not the elder of your clan. You have no right to speak for your elder in this regard. So you might as well shut the fuck up, Lydia. And then on the other side of the fence, define very specifically what is sovereign over the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution, and think very clearly that it can't be defined in an Act of Parliament, because that sovereignty gave the ability for the Parliament to exist in the Constitution in the first place, Lydia.
We've been sovereign since the beginning of time, and we've proven that with the ancient cultural sites around the country and our ancient stories of how this country came to be. We have proof that we've been here for since a time immemorial. So,
well, proof something we will demonstrate very clearly later to be a total untruth. But let's just hit this nail on the head. The proof that you're a citizen is the fact that you lined up for Centrelink and signed up for that Centrelink. And then you look around your mob today and they just rely on government grants and Centrelink. So is there any self-determination in your very people? And that's where I'm starting to see it start to grow very clearly in my people, Lydia, but I don't see it anywhere in your people. You attempt to undermine my constitution instead of be nations. And this is the challenge secondary. How are you a nation in any way, shape or form if you don't have your very own constituted body? That's a clear-cut indication that none of you know what the fuck you're talking about.
Sovereign to sovereign is not states and territories. And those state and territory treaties, whilst it's a good idea and it's mainly Labor that are doing it, it's run by the government. It's dictated to by the government. I was involved in the treaty process in Victoria as the member for Northcote.
When you open your mouth up to your criminal offences, so you conspired with Labor and now you're backtracking away from this communist conspiracy because you kind of realise that you were used. Is that what's going on? And elbows being twisted by money men that you no longer want to be involved with because some sort of freaky scam was going on that most of us would call a massive Ponzi scheme. And this is what we technically really need to address, isn't it, Lydia?
I negotiated the treaty legislation in Victoria and it's not good. They would not acknowledge that we are the sovereign people of these lands. They would not allow for an Elders Council to be established and part of the legislation. The whole chamber voted that down. So there are problems with that. We have 38 nations in Victoria and only 11 are around the table to negotiate treaty in Victoria. So you can't exclude people. You've got to bring everybody to the table and negotiate in good faith and respectfully.
What was that? Labor only entertained 11 out of 38 tribes, and only the ones that would go with the communist plan, and you backtracked out of it and said, oh, that's not a good plan. We're not sovereigns. I'm a senator under oath of allegiance. For fuck's sake, Lydia. This really not how you go about being a self-determined people and then trying to undermine a constitution by committing an act of real-world treason and a conspiracy. You conspired against a government and then weren't happy with the results that you got in return. And the very government you conspired with is now backtracking because it's realising the very legal international ramifications of what it is doing and what it has already done.
Which was we had Jack Callion, you'll remember, a couple of weeks ago on the show. Terrific bloke. And he was saying how all the Voice is doing is setting Indigenous people against each other, this family or this clan against that clan. Because the whole structure that we've got in Australia, certain clans, certain tribes get favoured, others don't. They pit them against each other. We saw this with this opening of a motorway last week in WA, and they were arguing about who should open it. I think we got the grab.
Hard truth time. I danced for you. Pay me some coin. No, you weren't supposed to dance for them. I was supposed to dance for them. I'm the one that's supposed to dance for them. You can't dance for them. That's about the sum of this. This is the disgrace of two Aboriginal tribes that have fallen for welcome to country because it involves a monetary payment. And there's obviously a dispute, and we see it as a cultural dispute. But I'm telling you now that behind it all, there's a monetary dispute going on, and one man's pissed off with another man that he's not getting his slice of the pie. And this is the elbow setup that he's created over the last God knows how long. We even have Tony Abbott coming around and saying they're sick of welcome to country. Well, we're sick and tired of you undermining our constitution. We know our constitution. We can revert it back to what it was in 1966. That's about the blunt sum of all the truths here in relation to what's going on. But the hilarity that you're about to watch is just a bungle created by a government between two peoples that believe they have some sort of power when the actual power here is in the concrete behind them at which they're opening.
But I don't need these people coming out here thinking that you fellas could say this, say that on this land.
It was an uncomfortable moment for the minister, caught up in a turf war among First Nations people.
I don't need permission of you or anybody else. Neither do I. This is my country too.
A traditional smoking ceremony going up in smoke after competing Aboriginal groups fired up at each other.
I thought you fellas was from Mora. Well, you thought wrong. No.
Totally hilarious, isn't it? Like, oh, this is my land, oh! And it's between two tribes. I thought you, and like I said, if there's a monetary effect behind all of this. Oh, you thought wrong. Well, yeah, you did, because you're opening a bridge for someone that's not even from your mob, and you're saying thank you for doing it on your land, which is technically not your land, and you're just being paid to dance for someone who's actually in control of that land, right? And that bridge wouldn't exist if the monetary or financial powers behind building the bridge weren't there, you'd have no fucking bridge. This is the simple reality of things that tards don't want to look at when they protest and do all this activism and believe that they can somewhat change the functionality of a country they so what rely on. They have a dependence on it and therefore are unable to self-determine anything, given that it's not even their constitution, and proclaim to be First Nations and then act like this.
I want to get you on The Voice. We don't have a lot of time, but the Nationals have got out there without really consulting with the Liberals, it seems, and decided they're against an Indigenous voice. Can you, while you agree with their position, where they've landed, surely you can see the hypocrisy of what they've done, because they've said they wanted more detail. They're waiting for more detail. It hasn't been forthcoming, so they've just said no anyway.
No, that's not in principle, Chris. You have to look at it in principle. I know how you feel about the voice to Parliament, but in principle, if you want to enshrine this in the Constitution on principle, you are then separating Australians based on their race, which I totally oppose.
But hang on. I disagree with your take on that, but you're right.
Yep.
This is where the media has a little leeway to play and can't get into legal trouble because they incite ideologies or points of views in people. But Pauline's very right here. She's putting her legal foot down as a senator under an oath who's got a duty to the law, and she's basically just putting her foot down. There is no opinions when it comes to the law. A justice once said, your opinions are like assholes. No one wants to see them. So when it comes to the law, Pauline is very much correct in this and has put her foot down, and you're about to hear what her foot says.
You can make that position. You can take that position that you just don't think this should be in the Constitution. But that's not what that's not what the Nationals argued. They said, we're going to wait and see. We're worried about this. We want to see the detail of what you're going to legislate. And then they've come out and said, and then they've suddenly said they don't agree with it because it won't work. Well, they haven't seen any legislation, so how can they say it won't work?
Chris.
She's pissed at this baiting question and this baiting questioner. He is a little bit of a rat, so she's well within her right to start getting pissed off. But he quashed her legal qualms over the voice, which she knows what she's about to say, and turned it into her right to vote no. No. She has the right to hold to account this entire conspiracy at law to the very criminal offences that it has broken, such as apartheid in the Criminal Code 1995, Volume 2. And now we've seen multiple members of the actual parliamentary bodies and legal fraternities speak very much about this being division by race or a racially identified set of laws.
I'm not I'm not a politician for or represent the National Party whatsoever.
Exactly, which is why I'm inviting you to criticise them.
Giggling like that is a little sign of insanity, and it demonstrates some sort of narcissistic behaviour in the questioner.
Jacinta and I agree with this, okay? Jacinta Price, and she's been the voice for this, and she is an Aboriginal woman herself and has explained the case. And she has been saying what I've been saying since I first entered Parliament. It's about equality for all Australians, regardless of your race. You know, to say that I have no connection to the land is a load of BS. I was born here. I love this country. They don't have any more rights over it than what I do. Forget about the fact is they were the first peoples here in this nation. That's going back 60,000 years ago. Deal with today and the now.
All right. Well, let's progress this conversation a little further then, because you mentioned...
Oh, shit. I wasn't expecting you to just blurt out the fact that you were born here and this was your land and you were a naked owner and you had some sort of say over and above all of this bullshit going on through a line of authority defined in a crown that was given to you. Very interesting. Stop, stomp, 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 stomp that line, Pauline. It's a pretty good line to see.
Jacinta Nampijinpa Price, a good friend of mine as well. Do you think that she is the one who has led the Nationals policy here? She has no official position. She's not a front bencher. Do you think this Nationals policy belongs to her and that David Littleproud and the rest of the party are following her?
I think that she is the spokesperson for it. She speaks with authority on it. She knows what she's talking about. And I have already suggested that she should be the Assistant Minister, if not the Minister, representing the Coalition with regard to the Aboriginal issues, because I think Julian Lesser is absolutely hopeless.
We get a little bit closer to the truth here. So I think all of your corporate parties should be abolished and that members should represent their people, and that as Jacinta Price wants to speak for her people, she should be able to represent her region and her residents and her constituents instead of having to follow the party line of, say, the Nationals. And then you wouldn't have to put up with some idiot at Sky trying to play against the whole entire ideology of the Voice or for the ideology of the Voice, because they play both parties here and they try and drum up, drama. And that's what ratings are made from, drama, right? So I just think Jacinta should be the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs right from the word go, regardless of what party is in power. And I think parties should be abolished. I think the whole idea of corporates running for Parliament is the disgrace that we have here.
And I have been trying to encourage the Liberal Party to actually take more of a stance with this, because people are screaming out, want some direction, they want to know where they stand on this issue. It is such a very important issue, and if you don't start debating it and talking about it now, putting pressure on the Albanese government to put clear what they intend to put in this, it will be rushed through. People will vote emotionally with it, thinking, oh yeah, why not? It's not going to have an impact on us. Where we need to actually have full disclosure, know what's happening, understand by putting this in the Constitution what it means to the future generations of this nation. And you know what, Chris? I don't trust the governments. I don't trust them at all. And that's why I'm taking a stance on this. I'm an Australian as much as any Aboriginal, and I will fight for the rights of all Australians to be treated equally, not based on race.
Pauline, we will continue to discuss this issue. No doubt you and I will continue to agree to disagree, but thanks for your time.
Agree to disagree on international law from the point of view of a media organisation that is sort of like the Red Cross in this, in that it must be neutral and can't pick a side in this war. And that seems to be your generating conflict, but by not accepting that there is a legal position at which Pauline is staunchly now standing for. And this is very clear at the end of the video, where she says she will not live in a country divided by race. And that's what you are doing when you are attempting to upset executive branch government, and then realising that executives exist in the country, and then backtracking on your decisions, knowing your position in Hague Conventions. And this is the stark reality that people are starting to recognise and realise as we move forward through this, that merely speaking up in a legal capacity has caused a massive stir among all of you.
Go on feelings and emotions. I was in a cafe yesterday and there are a couple of women next to us talking about The Voice, and quote, or paraphrasing, one of them said, no, I don't want to know anything. I'm just going to vote yes. And it's better if nobody asks anything. Wow. Well, I'm sorry. Is that the Australian mentality now? We don't ask questions. We don't want to know what's going on. We just go, oh, yeah. I've been told I'm sheep, so I've been told to vote yes, so I will. Let's talk about The Voice. While you've been away, lots happened.
The price of freedom of speech is that we get offended by some things. I mean, my position is that I oppose the referendum because of my attitude to changing the Constitution. But we need to have this discussion in a respectful way and not attack people. And I'm very upset at the way the referendum and the debate has poisoned some relationships, including a bit in my community. So we just need to find a way to disagree without hurting or hating each other. Yeah, I just don't understand why we need that sort of racism and hurt in our society. It should be a battle of ideas, and we don't need to hurt each other while we do it or put those personal insults out there.
So you sit in a cafe, you realise the people around you are retarded, and then you listen to a guy on, I think it's Q&A, who then speaks about how this has turned into an argument in the local communities and has become a racist issue, and a minority population seen to be drunks and incapable of doing all these things get hated on even more when you have people like Jacinta Price trying to rise them up out of that poverty. And this is the reality of it, when this doesn't even get addressed by either side of this. This is someone who thinks they know versus people that don't even care and just going to vote yes just to get it out of the way because they couldn't be bothered even thinking about what their country is. And then on the reverse, you've got a man saying, oh, we've got to listen to everyone's opinions. No, we don't. There is a legal standing here at which you can't argue. And all of these opinions that Labor and the Greens and this communist ideology have seeded into your society are not going to stand up when you get to that courtroom and start defining things very clearly at law before justices. And this whole entire clown show has already shown to be a legal problem, given that they are backing off in many ways after finding out that we the people aren't that dumb on the matter, right? And that they face real consequences for many of their actions, including hangable offences and international war crimes that have occurred in the last 15 to 20 years. This is an inexcusable and inescapable outcome for a lot of them now, given that the crime has been committed, the crimes have been pointed out, justices have recognised that line of standing and those criminal offences, and it's only a matter of time before the greater population realise what's going on in this country.
We live in this country together now. Why not invite their ancestors here to be with them, to look after them too?
This referendum, this country, belongs to all Australians, not just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, belongs to all Australians. And really good to welcome not just the people but their ancestors, to welcome them into the room and to be a part of that gathering. I think it really makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we're a humble lot. We really are a humble lot.
This has to now spill out into a second video of which the continuing evidence needs to be laid out. I've got video evidence that will lay out probably a second video here in relation to this racial discrimination and apartheid that is being technically created in this country. And you can see that the ideology that's been seeded into these Aborigines is that they are inviting us into their country, of which it's our constitution, of which they were invited into in referendum 1967, of which they were invited into our constitution in 1967. The ideology being seeded into these people's heads is that they are inviting us somewhat into something that is theirs while trying to undermine the executive branch of what is ours. And this is the very clear message to all of you. They got caught the fuck out doing it, and no matter what court you sit before, they will not win. As naked owners with a line of authority in Anzac, under the stone of remembrance, in the King's domain, you have naked and full ownership of the Constitution as the Australian Imperial Crown, and that is what is under administration and being manipulated by communist powers in this very government, at which have used Aborigine in the belief that they can treaty for climate change, as we saw in the last video that I put out. So this will have to spill out into another video, but you can see that this is very clearly a criminal offence of apartheid that has already occurred at the hands of a conspiracy, a group of men and women that conspired together to undermine Aborigine population with ideology and undermine the constitution of the rest of the people. And that's very clear. Communist, not an ideology anymore. It's a proven conspiracy at law in that these players did in fact act already and complete half of the things in which they acted on. This no longer means that it's an attempt at law. All of these things did come to fruition the moment Albo announced the date of a referendum without defining at law the full disclosure of the legal ramifications of the very referendum at which he has now announced a date. There are legal ramifications up the wahoo for Albo and his criminal gang right now because of what's happened.